When you look at a traditional map of human progress, the roads are usually drawn in a very, very specific, orderly sequence.
Right, like a checklist.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
almost like a set of instructions you get with a piece of flat pack furniture.
Yeah.
I mean, step one, step two, step three.
Yeah, it's a highly linear path that we've all been taught to expect. The established narrative kind of dictates that a society starts out in the fields, right? With subsistence agriculture.
Right. Just growing enough to survive.
Exactly. And over time, they figure out how to generate a surplus, which frees up labor, and then that labor moves into factories, triggering an industrial revolution.
The big chimney stacks and textile mills.
You got it. And then eventually, once that manufacturing base is really mature and wealth has accumulated, the society transitions into office buildings, building a service and knowledge economy.
So it's farming, then factories, then services. I mean, that is the standard economic blueprint that built so much of the Western world.
It is, yeah.
But then you look at the economic map of East Africa, specifically Kenya over the last several decades, and suddenly that traditional blueprint just gets thrown completely out the window.
Not completely torn up.
Right. The roads are crossing over each other. Some established pathways are just completely missing. And there are these massive digital superhighways being constructed where, well, according to the old rules, there shouldn't even be pavement yet.
It is the absolute definition of a developmental cartographer's nightmare. Or if you look at it from another angle, it is an economist's absolute dream.
A dream, really.
Yeah, because what we are witnessing is the real-time rewriting of how a nation builds wealth and infrastructure in the modern era. It's fascinating.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are bringing you on a journey into one of the most fascinating economic and social transformations of the last century.
We really are.
Our mission today is to unpack a truly massive set of historical and economic records. I mean, we are talking about over 6 decades of World Bank indicators.
Stretching from 1960 all the way to 2023.
Yeah, exactly. We are charting the remarkable transformation of Kenya, pulling apart a comprehensive national development report that basically frames the country as the gateway to East Africa and the absolute frontier of digital transformation.
And, it is a transformation in the truest sense of the word. We're looking at a country that started this historical record as a low-income, agriculture-dependent nation.
Really grappling with enormous population pressure.
And colonial legacies, yeah.
Yeah.
And we are going to trace its incredibly complex path to becoming a middle-income, digital, service-driven powerhouse.
And I have a question for you, the listener, to keep in the back of your mind as we go through this journey together today. Imagine you are tasked with developing a nation. How does a country just, skip the traditional industrial age entirely?
Right. How do you do that?
Like, how do you leapfrog straight from traditional farming to mobile money and digital services without building those massive steel mills and textile factories first? I mean, how does that actually happen on the ground?
Well, to answer that, we are going to have to look well beyond the top-line numbers. We need to uncover the friction, the victories, the policy gambles, and the really intense growing pains of a nation that is literally transforming its economic DNA.
Because the historical record tells a story that is anything but a straight, predictable line.
Not at all, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can understand the economy of Kenya, or any nation for that matter, we have to deeply understand the people who are actually driving it.
The human engine.
The human engine, yes. When you look at the sheer scale of the demographic shift from the 1960s to today, the scale of the growth is, well, it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
It really is staggering. I mean, if we go back to the 1960s, you are looking at a total population hovering around just 8 million people.
8 million?
Yeah, but by the time we hit 2022, that number has surged past 54 million.
Wait, let me just do the math on that really quick. You were talking about a population multiplying by more than 6 times in a single human lifetime.
Yeah, a massive explosion.
If someone was born in Kenya in 1960, they have watched their country grow 6-fold. I mean, imagine the sheer infrastructural pressure of that reality. Imagine the housing, the food, the clean water, the roads, just what is required just to keep society functioning when you are adding that many people that quickly.
Right, and it's not just the total number of people either, it's where they are living.
What do you mean?
Well, in 1960, the urbanization rate, which is, the percentage of people actually living in cities, was incredibly low, just about 7.4%.
Wow, so the vast, vast majority of the country was rural.
Exactly. But by 2023, that urbanization figure has steadily climbed past 29%.
Oh, wow.
So you have a population multiplying by 6, and simultaneously, millions of those people are moving out of the countryside and into rapidly expanding urban centers like Nairobi and Mombasa.
I mean, that is a recipe for immense strain on a governor.
Huge strain, yeah.
But I imagine the raw population number isn't even the most vital metric here when we are trying to understand the economic engine, right? It's not just how many people there are, but the structure of that population.
Yeah.
Like who is doing the
Yeah.
work and who needs to be taken care of.
Precisely. If you want to really understand the foundational engine of an economy, you have to look at a concept called the age dependency ratio.
Okay, let's define that.
Sure. So for anyone who might not look at demographic tables every day, the age dependency ratio is essentially the ratio of dependents, meaning children younger than 15 and adults older than 64 compared to the working age population.
Which is anyone between 15 and 64. Really.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a measure of who is theoretically producing the resources versus who strictly requires the resources just to survive.
You hit the nail on the head. It measures the burden on the productive part of the population. And when we trace Kenya's history back to the 1970s, the age dependency ratio peaked at an absolutely incredible 117.9%.
Let's make sure we really grasp what that actually looks like on the ground. 117.9%. That means for every 100 working-age people in Kenya in the 1970s, there were nearly 118 dependents relying on them.
Yes. You had more people needing basic care, needing food, needing to be clothed, needing elementary schooling, than you had people in the prime of their productive working lives.
That is just wild. I always like to think of a national economy like a wagon.
Okay, I like
But
that.
in the 1970s, for every 100 people pulling the wagon, you had 118 people riding in it. Think about how heavy that wagon is.
Very heavy.
Think about how much physical and financial energy it takes just to keep it moving forward, let alone speed up and invest in a new axle or, I don't know, better set of wheels. All your energy goes into just pulling.
Right, survival mode.
But then, as we trace this demographic line through the decades, fertility rates slowly begin to decline. And by recent years, this dependency number has plummeted to 66.1%.
And that is a staggering demographic shift. What that actually means is the proportion of the working age population, that 15 to 64 bracket, has risen from roughly 46% of the total population to nearly 60% today.
So returning to the wagon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are only 66 riders in the wagon for every 100 people pulling. That changes the entire physics of the economy.
It really does.
The wagon is vastly lighter, and you have significantly more muscle pulling it.
It fundamentally rewrites the economic reality of a household and, by extension, the entire state budget.
But hold on, I have to push back here for a second.
Sure.
Just having more working-age people doesn't automatically mean they're productive, right? If the wagon gets lighter, but the 100 people pulling it are just standing around because there's nowhere to go, you have a major problem. Doesn't a massive youth bulge usually cause immense societal instability and massive unemployment?
It certainly can.
I mean, you see it all over history. A huge generation comes of age, there are no jobs for them to step into, they get angry, and things fall apart.
You've just identified the critical tension of developing economies right there. A youth bulge is a prerequisite for explosive economic growth, but it is absolutely not a guarantee.
Right.
It can just as easily become a demographic disaster. And this brings us to a crucial economic concept known as the demographic dividend. And what's fascinating here is understanding the exact mechanics of why this shift matters so deeply when it is managed correctly.
Okay, so walk us through the mechanics of that dividend. How does a lighter wagon actually turn into wealth?
Well, it starts at the kitchen table. When an average family goes from having, say, 6 or 7 children to having 3 or 4, the immediate crushing economic pressure lifts.
Because there are fewer mouths to feed.
Exactly. Fewer dependents mean that a family can shift their meager capital away from basic day-to-day survival, literally just buying enough maize and beans to keep everyone alive, and move toward active investments. They aren't just consuming anymore, they are saving. And with those savings, they can afford to send a child to school for a few extra years. They can afford the transport fare to a clinic when someone is sick, which, prevents a minor illness from becoming a permanent disability.
So the microeconomy of the household stabilizes. And I assume the government experiences the exact same financial relief at the macro level.
Precisely. The historical records show the young dependency ratio dropping significantly over time. Imagine you are the Ministry of Education in the 1980s.
Okay.
When you have an exploding birth rate, you are frantically building basic elementary schools and hiring minimally trained teachers just to keep up with the sheer volume of 6-year-olds entering the system.
They're just putting out fires.
Right. All your capital goes to managing quantity. But when the birth rate stabilizes, the pressure on the primary system evolves. The government can suddenly afford to shift its budget.
They can focus on other things.
Yeah, they can invest in secondary education, university programs, infrastructure, and the digital grid. The demographic dividend allows a society to upgrade the quality of its human capital, not just endlessly manage the quantity.
So the people pulling the wagon aren't just more numerous. Ideally, because of these shifted investments, they are getting stronger, smarter, and better equipped.
Exactly.
Which brings us perfectly to the next massive question. Now that we know millions of new, better-equipped workers are entering the labor force, where are they actually working? Because if they aren't going into traditional factory jobs, what are they doing?
So we are moving from the people to the output. And to understand this, we have to look at the structural evolution of the economy, specifically looking at the percentage of gross domestic product, or GDP, generated by different sectors over time.
Let's start with the bedrock. In the 1960s, agriculture value added was massive.
Oh, huge.
It accounted for over 35, maybe 38% of the entire GDP. It was the absolute foundation of the nation's wealth. But as we slide the timeline forward to recent years, that number drops significantly, down to roughly 21%.
Now, it's important to clarify here that this is a relative decline.
What do you mean?
It is not necessarily that agriculture shrank in absolute terms. I mean, they are still growing vast amounts of tea, coffee, and horticulture.
Right, they didn't stop farming.
Exactly. But the rest of the economy grew so much faster that farming's slice of the national pie just got much smaller.
Right, and conventionally, in that standard economic blueprint we talked about at the very beginning, if agriculture shrinks, industry and heavy manufacturing are supposed to explode to take its place.
That's the textbook model, yeah.
The farmers move to the cities and work in textile mills and steel plants. But looking at the historical data for Kenya, the industrial sector remains incredibly flat.
Very flat.
It just hovers around 17% of GDP for decades. It never has that explosive chimney stack industrial revolution moment that defined the development of, say, South Korea or Britain.
No, it doesn't. The manufacturing base remains quite modest. Instead, the economic growth went somewhere else entirely.
Services.
Yes, services.
Services value added has climbed relentlessly to represent over 53% of the GDP today. More than half of all the wealth generated in the country is now coming from services.
A massive shift.
And alongside this, if we look at the national income, we see a huge change. In 2022, their gross national income, or GNI, per capita reached around $2,170.
Let me pause you there for a second, because we need to define some terms.
Oh, sure.
Earlier, we were talking about GDP, gross domestic product. Now you've introduced GNI, gross national income. It's crucial we understand the difference here.
That's a great point. Why do economists switch between GDP and GNI, and what does it actually tell us?
Well, GDP measures the total value of everything produced inside the borders of a country, regardless of who owns the company. So, if a foreign megacorporation builds a factory in Nairobi, everything that factory produces boosts the GDP.
Even if the profits leave the country.
Exactly. But GNI is different. GNI measures the total income retained by the citizens of the country no matter where it was earned.
Oh, I see.
It accounts for money leaving the country, like profits being sent back to that foreign megacorporation's headquarters, or interest payments made to foreign lenders. And it accounts for money coming in, like remittances from Kenyans working abroad.
Ah, so GNI is a much more accurate reflection of the actual wealth sitting in the pockets of the people, rather than just the geographic output of the land.
Exactly. And reaching a GNI per capita of over $2,100 is a monumental achievement. It marks their successful official transition from a low-income nation into a lower-middle-income nation.
That's huge.
And look at the resilience of that growth, too. Even with the devastating economic stagnation they faced in the 1990s, which, we can see as a massive flatline in the data, and even with recent global shocks, their economy bounced back forcefully, hitting a 7.5% GDP growth rate in 2021.
That resilience is incredible. But it raises a deeply complex reality and, frankly, a huge question for me. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
We traditionally think of development as farming, then factories, then services. Did Kenya just skip the factory phase?
Yeah.
How do you build a service economy without an industrial base to support it? I always thought services were things like marketing, finance, and IT things that service the underlying manufacturing sector.
You've hit on the phenomenon of economic leapfrogging.
Drogging.
Yes. The reality on the ground shows us definitively that the traditional manufacturing phase remained remarkably flat, while services, specifically things like telecommunications, mobile finance, tourism, and digital enterprises, absolutely exploded.
So they just bypassed it.
They utilized emerging digital connectivity to bypass the need for heavy, capital-intensive manufacturing to generate wealth.
So they didn't need to build massive steel mills and coal plants to raise their national income. They built cell towers, server farms, and digital financial networks.
Yes, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to provide some crucial context to this leapfrog. It is not a utopian story.
Right.
While the service sector produces the lion's share of the wealth, that 53% of GDP agriculture is still a massive, massive employer.
Hold on, let me conceptualize that. So even though farming is only a fifth of the GDP, it's employing way more than a fifth of the people.
Drastically more. And this creates what economists call a dual economy.
A dual economy. I think of it like a two-lane highway.
Okay, let's hear it.
In one lane, you have a dirt road with horse-drawn carts. That's the traditional, labor-intensive, low-yield subsistence farming sector. It employs millions of people, but they're moving very slowly and generating very little financial wealth.
Right.
And right next to it, in the other lane, you have a magnetic levitation bullet train. That's the highly productive, high-tech, digitally integrated service sector.
That is a perfect metaphor. You have a software developer in Nairobi building complex mobile banking apps, generating immense GDP value per capita. And literally just a few hours away, someone is engaged in manual subsistence farming, generating very low GDP value, but representing a huge chunk of the actual labor force.
So the leapfrog happened in wealth generation, but the employment leapfrog is much, much stickier. And the challenge for the government is figuring out how to let the people on the dirt road merge onto the bullet train.
And that duality is the defining challenge of Kenya's modern economy. You have millions of people in that demographic dividend who desperately need jobs. But the service sector, while incredibly wealthy and productive, doesn't always require massive amounts of manual labor in the way a 19th century textile mill did.
Right. I mean, a textile mill can hire 5,000 people with minimal education to run looms. A mobile banking startup might generate the same amount of wealth, but it only needs 50 highly educated software engineers and analysts.
Exactly. It requires educated labor.
Which is the perfect transition to how you actually prepare a population to merge onto that bullet train. You can't write code, process digital insurance claims, or manage a modern logistics supply chain if you can't read.
No, you definitely can't.
And you certainly can't contribute to the economy if you are battling severe preventable diseases.
Human capital is the bridge between those two lanes.
Exactly. So, how did Kenya build this human capital? Let's dive deeply into the education and public health realities, because you can't have a digital highway without drivers, and you need to train those drivers.
Let's start with education, because the historical achievements here are genuinely staggering when viewed over the long term. If you look at the youth literacy rate people between the ages of 15 and 24, it recently hit 93.1%.
Over 93% of the youth can read and write. That is an immense foundation for a knowledge economy.
It is. But the path to get there wasn't a slow, steady incline. There were some massive, disruptive policy shifts.
Yeah, I was looking at the primary school completion rates in the data, and the numbers seemed mathematically impossible at first glance.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
The completion rate soared from around 40% in the 1970s to over 100% in recent years.
I know. When you first see a completion rate over 100%, your instinct is to assume the data was entered incorrectly.
Right. I was thinking, wait, mathematically, you can't have more than 100% of a demographic finish school. Unless, are they counting adults going back to first grade? Is that what's skewing the math?
You deduced exactly what happened. It's a fascinating statistical artifact of a monumental policy decision. To understand it, you have to look at another piece of the puzzle. Overage students.
Overage students.
Yeah. Historically, the records show overage students hovering around 30% of total primary enrollment.
So nearly a third of the kids in primary school were older than the traditional age for their grade.
Yes. And this perfectly illustrates the impact of the 2003 free basic education policy.
Okay, tell me about that.
Before 2003, public schools required fees. They might seem small to an outsider, but for a family engaged in subsistence farming, the folks on that dirt road we talked about, those fees kept millions of children out of the classroom.
They just couldn't afford it.
Right. But in 2003, the government abolished those fees. And when the doors were thrown open, it wasn't just the 6-year-olds who showed up to first grade.
It was the 10-year-olds,
Yeah.
the 15-year-olds, and even the adults who had never had the chance to learn how to read.
Exactly. Millions of older children and adults flooded the primary education system overnight. Have you ever heard the story of Kimani Marouge?
The name sounds familiar, but remind me.
Kimani Marouge was an 84-year-old Kenyan man. When the government announced free universal primary education in 2003, he decided it was finally his time to learn how to read the Bible and count his money. He enrolled in first grade at 84 years old, sitting at a tiny desk alongside 6-year-olds. He actually holds the Guinness World Record for the oldest person to begin primary school.
That is an incredible, beautiful reality. An 84-year-old man sitting in a primary school desk, just starving for that human capital upgrade.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And because the metric for primary completion rate is calculated by dividing the total number of graduates of any age by the number of children of the official graduation age in the population, having all these older students graduate pushes the metric over 100%.
It's a numerical quirk that represents a massive triumph of access.
And crucially, it wasn't just boys filling those classrooms. The historical records highlight the Gender Parity Index for primary enrollment reaching near 1.0.
Perfect equality.
For every boy enrolled, there was a girl enrolled. In a single generation, they functionally closed the primary education gender gap, unlocking the intellectual potential of half their population to participate in this new service economy.
That's a huge deal.
I mean, you cannot build a modern nation with one hand tied behind your back and closing that gap untied that hand.
But, education is only half the human capital equation. You can have the most educated populace in the world, but the other half of the equation is public health.
Right.
You cannot build a modern economy if your workforce is decimated by illness. Sick people cannot pull the wagon.
And the health trajectory here is arguably the most dramatic and sobering part of this entire deep dive. Let's look at the foundational metric, life expectancy at birth. In 1960, the average life expectancy was just 46 years old.
It is hard to comprehend an economy functioning when the average citizen barely makes it to their late 40s. The loss of institutional knowledge, the loss of skilled labor, it's an immense headwind.
But today, that number has grown to 67 years. They added over 2 decades of life to the average citizen.
That's incredible.
And you see exactly how they did it when you look at the under 5 child mortality rate. In 1960, out of every 1,000 live births, roughly 200 children died before their 5th birthday. 1 in 5 children.
Think about the profound psychological and economic toll of that on a society. Think about a family's reluctance to invest heavily in a child's long-term education when the statistical odds of survival are that grim.
It changes everything.
It does. Today, that mortality number has plummeted to around 40 per 1,000. It is a tremendous victory for basic sanitation, widespread vaccination campaigns, and maternal care.
But to truly understand Kenya's resilience, we have to look at the darkest period in their modern history. Because in the 1990s, that incredible progress in life expectancy actually hit a wall and started reversing.
Yes.
And that brings us to the staggering fight against HIV/AIDS. What's fascinating here is how close it came to changing the entire trajectory.
This is a critical point. Medical improvements were lowering mortality from traditional infectious diseases, but then the HIV epidemic struck and it threatened to completely derail the nation's future.
I have the historical estimates right here, and the sheer scale is chilling. In the mid to late 1990s, the HIV prevalence rate among adults aged 15 to 49 hit a peak of nearly 10%.
Unbelievable.
At its worst, there were an estimated 250,000 new infections occurring every single year.
Let's analyze the cold, hard macroeconomic reality of that tragedy. 250,000 new infections a year, primarily targeting people between the ages of 15 and 49.
Right, the working age.
That is the exact demographic we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
That is the demographic dividend. Those are the people in the prime of their lives, the ones who are supposed to be pulling the wagon, raising the children, and building the digital service economy.
That wasn't just a humanitarian nightmare. It was the literal hollowing out of the workforce. If that trajectory had continued, the dependency ratio would have skyrocketed again, not because there were too many children, but because the middle generation, the providers, were dying.
Exactly. It threatened to completely collapse the economic transformation before it even began.
But then you look at the recent reality. That prevalence rate has dropped from nearly 10% to roughly 3.7% in 2022. The number of new infections has crashed down to around 15,000 a year. Still a persistent challenge, obviously, but a massive fraction of the peak. How did they bend that curve so drastically?
And it wasn't magic. It was a massive coordinated intervention.
So what did they do?
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale and logistics of the medical intervention. It wasn't just public awareness campaigns promoting behavioral changes. It was a hardcore medical supply chain miracle.
Getting the drugs to the people.
Exactly. The records show antiretroviral therapy, or ART, coverage skyrocketing. Recent data indicates that between 70 to 90% of all individuals who need ART are receiving it.
Walk us through the mechanics of that. What does it actually mean for the economy?
Well, antiretroviral therapy suppresses the virus. It means a person living with HIV doesn't develop AIDS. They don't become bedridden. They don't die prematurely.
They can keep working.
Exactly. And crucially, when the viral load is suppressed, they cannot transmit the virus to others. So by distributing this medication to 70 to 90% of the infected population, you are simultaneously saving the lives of the current workforce and protecting the future workforce.
It was a massive national mobilization, heavily supported by international partnerships, bilateral aid, and organizations like PEPFAR.
Yeah, a huge global effort.
And if we look at it through the strict lens of economics, this massive public health intervention didn't just save lives, it literally saved the demographic dividend. It preserved the human capital that is now driving that 53% of GDP in the service sector.
Exactly. Without that RT coverage, the leapfrog doesn't happen, the service economy doesn't happen. The demographic dividend becomes a demographic disaster. They recognized that the health of the population was the ultimate infrastructural asset, and they protected the engine.
Okay, let's take stock of where we are. We have a rapidly urbanizing population. The wagon is lighter because the dependency ratio has dropped. The workers pulling the wagon are highly literate, with youth literacy over 93%.
Right.
And they are physically healthy, having survived and mitigated a devastating epidemic. We have millions of healthy, educated workers stepping out of school, ready to participate in the service economy.
But if they aren't going into factories, how do they actually connect to this new service economy?
Exactly. You can't participate in the digital economy in the dark, and you can't build a modern business without a way to move money. Which brings us to the final crucial ingredient of the leapfrog.
Connectivity.
Connectivity.
This is where the structural shift to services is truly operationalized.
Let's look at the bedrock of connectivity, electricity. Historically, national electricity access was down in the low teens. Just a tiny fraction of the country, mostly the political and economic elite, had reliable power.
Right. Very limited.
But the modern figures show a massive surge. National access has climbed to over 76%. And in urban areas where that service sector is concentrated, it is a staggering 96 to 98% access.
That's a game changer.
Within a single generation, millions of households went from relying on kerosene lamps, which are, dangerous, expensive, and toxic, to simply flipping a light switch.
And that electrification is the literal power source for the next massive shift. The explosion of mobile cellular subscriptions.
Oh, the mobile boom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the year 2000, the number of mobile phone subscriptions was virtually zero. It was a luxury item for the ultra-rich. Today, there's massive absolute saturation. The penetration rate is approaching 120%.
Wait, 120%, meaning there are more active mobile SIM cards and subscriptions than there are people in the country.
Yes, people have multiple phones or multiple SIMs for different networks. And this ubiquitous mobile network leads us to the true aha moment of this entire deep dive, the holy grail of economic leapfrogging.
Financial inclusion. Account ownership at a financial institution or with a mobile money service provider.
The ability to store, send, and receive capital securely.
Yes, total population ownership of a financial account is near 80%.
Yeah.
But the breakdown of those demographics is what truly tells the story here. It's 75% inclusion for women, it's 83% for men, and perhaps most astonishingly, it is an incredible 67% inclusion for the poorest 40% of the population.
That last number, 67% of the poorest citizens having access to digital finance, is nothing short of an economic revolution.
Let's really contextualize this for a second. Imagine you were a farmer or a small street vendor 30 years ago. You don't have a bank account because the nearest physical bank branch is 2 towns over, and they require a minimum deposit you just can't afford.
Right, the barriers were too high.
You don't have a landline phone. You deal entirely in physical cash. This is incredibly dangerous because you can be robbed. It's hard to transport. If you want to send money to your mother in another village, you literally have to put it on a bus or carry it yourself.
Very inefficient.
And worst of all, because you deal only in cash, you have no financial footprint. You are invisible to the formal economy. You cannot build credit, you cannot get a loan to expand your business, and you cannot get insurance.
You are trapped in the informal economy, moving at the speed of walking.
But now, you have a bank in your pocket. The mobile payment revolution, specifically platforms like M-Pesa, isn't just a fun tech story about people using cell phones. It is the actual beating heart of the service economy we just spent 20 minutes talking about.
Let's explain how this actually works, because it's brilliant in its simplicity.
Please do.
M-Pesa didn't require everyone to suddenly buy expensive smartphones and get high-speed internet. It was built on basic SMS text messaging technology. It works on the cheapest, most basic feature phones.
Wait, just with regular texts. How do you turn a text message into physical cash?
You utilize the existing retail infrastructure. They took the thousands of tiny corner shops, kiosks, and airtime sellers that already existed in every village and neighborhood and turned them into human ATMs.
Okay, so I go to a shop.
Right. You walk up to a kiosk, hand the shopkeeper physical cash, and they send an SMS that credits your phone's digital wallet with that amount of electronic money. You can then text that electronic money to anyone else in the country instantly, securely, with a PIN code.
And then the person who gets the text.
The recipient can walk to their local kiosk, show the text, and withdraw physical cash.
That is absolute genius.
Yeah.
They bypass the need to build thousands of brick-and-mortar bank branches with expensive vaults, security cameras, and armed guards.
Exactly. They didn't have to.
They just used the existing cell towers and the local shopkeepers. They leapfrogged 100 years of Western retail banking evolution in less than a decade.
And when you achieve that level of financial inclusion, several profound macroeconomic shifts happen simultaneously. First, as you mentioned, it brings the informal economy into the light. All those daily transactions that used to happen in untraceable cash are now digitized.
Right.
A street vendor selling vegetables now has a verifiable multi-year digital transaction history.
Which means they are no longer invisible.
Exactly. With that data, micro-lending algorithms can assess their risk and offer them a small business loan instantly, directly to their phone. They can access crop insurance that pays out automatically if satellite data shows there hasn't been enough rain. It integrates them into the global financial system.
That's wild. And what about the speed of the economy?
That is the second major shift. It drastically increases the velocity of money.
The velocity of money meaning the speed at which a single shilling changes hands and moves through the economy.
Yes. Think of the multiplier effect here. In the past, it might take 3 days for a city worker to travel back to their rural village to hand their parents a stack of cash. That money is doing nothing for those 3 days.
Just sitting on a bus.
Exactly. Now, they send it instantly via text. The parents immediately use that digital money to buy fertilizer from the local dealer. The dealer immediately uses it to pay their supplier in the city. The same shilling facilitates 3 different economic transactions in a single afternoon.
Oh, I see.
The money is doing infinitely more work in far less time, which artificially expands the money supply and drives GDP growth.
And we cannot overlook the impact on gender equality either. Look at that 75% inclusion rate for women. Mobile money fundamentally empowers female entrepreneurs.
It's huge for that.
In many traditional societies, women struggle to maintain secure control over cash. It can be taken by family members or lost. A digital wallet, protected by a personal PIN, gives women secure, autonomous control over their own capital. It gives them financial privacy and the independence to save and invest in their own businesses.
It is a phenomenal success story, but
Uh-oh, I hear the inevitable economist's but.
revolutions are never free. And leapfrogging comes with a massive bill. We have painted a picture of incredible growth, resilience, and technological adoption. But what is the actual tangible cost of this rapid transformation?
Right, how do you pay for it?
Exactly. How did they pay for the paved roads, the massive electrical grid expansion, and the new schools? That brings us to the final chapter of our deep dive, the ledger's friction.
Because you're right, looking at the overarching reality, it's not all up and to the right without serious consequences. You cannot simply will a modern nation into existence. Let's open the books on debt, environmental depletion, governance, and the lingering social challenges.
Let's start with how they finance this leap. We need to look at foreign investment and national debt. Over the years, Kenya has been a significant recipient of official development assistance, or ODA.
So foreign.
Right, with massive bilateral support from countries like the US, the UK, and Germany. They've also seen fluctuating but vital foreign direct investment, or FDI, from international corporations looking to establish a foothold in the East African gateway.
But aid and private investment weren't enough to build the massive infrastructure they needed. They had to borrow.
Heavily. If we look at the tracking of long-term public and publicly guaranteed debt, there is a massive, sharp climbing of this debt in the modern era, particularly accelerating after 2014.
Right. Because you don't jump electricity access from the teens to 76% for free.
Right.
You don't build a massive new standard gauge railway from the port of Mombasa to the capital of Nairobi for free.
No, you certainly don't.
You don't expand airports and highways on a shoestring budget. They took out massive international loans to fund this hard infrastructure.
And now the bill is coming due. The financial ledger shows that total debt service expenditures, the money required just to pay the interest and principal on these loans, are now taking up a significant chunk of the gross national income. The figures show total debt service climbing over 5% of GNI.
That is a massive squeeze. That means over 5% of the nation's total income is immediately being routed out of the country just to pay international creditors.
Yep.
That is money that cannot be spent on hiring more teachers, stocking hospitals with medicine, or supporting local entrepreneurs. It is a severe fiscal constraint.
This is a debate economists have constantly. Is the debt worth it? Debt itself isn't inherently evil if it is used to build productive assets. If that new railway reduces shipping costs so dramatically that the manufacturing and agriculture sectors boom, and if that power grid allows the digital service sector to generate billions in new tax revenue, then the debt pays for itself. It is a calculated gamble on future growth.
But if the growth falters, or if global interest rates spike, that debt becomes an anchor around the neck of the economy. The margin for error shrinks dramatically.
Exactly. And it's not just financial debt they are accumulating. There is also environmental debt.
This is a fascinating part of the World Bank's economic analysis.
Oh.
They don't just look at money, they track environmental ledgers, trying to put a cold, hard dollar value on the loss of natural resources.
They do, yeah.
There is a specific metric called adjusted savings, net forest depletion.
Right, because traditional GDP calculation is flawed in this way. If you cut down an ancient, irreplaceable forest and sell the timber, your GDP goes up. It looks like economic growth.
But you're destroying the country.
But in reality, you have permanently destroyed an asset. The forest depletion metric attempts to subtract that loss from the national wealth.
And the reality shows that net forest depletion consistently eats away between 1.2% to 3.5% of the GNI. They're literally liquidating their natural capital to fuel their short-term economic growth. You can't sustain that forever.
No, you can't. But to be fair to the complete picture, Kenya is also a global leader in mitigating other environmental impacts.
Really? Like what?
The data shows that their carbon emission intensity, the amount of carbon emitted per unit of GDP, has actually been dropping.
Wait, really? As they develop, they are getting cleaner per dollar earned.
Yes, largely because they have invested massively in renewable energy, specifically geothermal power in the Great Rift Valley.
Oh, the geothermal plants.
Exactly. So they are cutting down forests, which is a significant debit on the ledger, but they are powering their digital grid with the heat of the earth, which is a massive credit. It is a very complex environmental balancing act.
And then there's the friction in the governance and social ledgers. The Global Governance Indicators, the WGI, show a really interesting dynamic. Kenya scores relatively well regionally on voice and accountability.
Meaning they have a vibrant, loud civil society, active elections, and a relatively free press. People can speak up.
But on the same WGI dashboard, they struggle significantly with control of corruption and the rule of law.
So the citizens have a voice, but the institutional plumbing of the state still has major leaks.
Exactly. And that institutional weakness exacerbates the final, perhaps most crucial friction we need to discuss: inequality and the quality of human capital.
Yes, this is huge.
We praise the fact that over 100% of kids are completing primary school. But being in a classroom doesn't magically equal learning.
No, it doesn't. This is the concept of learning poverty.
Explain that for us.
The statistics indicate that despite the massive enrollment numbers, a significant proportion of 10-year-old children still cannot read and understand a simple text.
meaning the quality of the education system is fighting a losing battle against the sheer quantity of students.
Right.
The classrooms are full, maybe 60 or 70 kids to a single teacher, so the basic rote memorization happens. But the deep cognitive learning, the critical thinking required to be a software engineer or a digital analyst, isn't always happening at the required depth.
And this feeds directly into the persistent economic inequality, represented by a stubbornly high Gini coefficient.
Right.
If the digital service sector, the bullet train we talked about, requires highly skilled, highly literate workers, but the public schools are suffering from learning poverty, who gets the jobs on the bullet train?
The people who can afford private schools. The elites.
Precisely. The people stuck on the dirt road, the subsistence farmers whose kids are in overcrowded, underfunded rural schools struggle to make the leap. The sheer access to education has been democratized, which is a massive achievement. But the quality of that education is still heavily stratified by wealth.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have a country that is an absolute pioneer, a mobile money powerhouse, a regional hub of innovation, a survivor of demographic and epidemiological crises.
Yeah, a real survivor.
But they are taking out a mortgage on their future, both financially, through massive public debt to build infrastructure, and environmentally through the depletion of their forests. And while they have built the digital highway, millions of their citizens are still walking on the dirt road next to it, struggling to gain the high-level skills needed to merge.
The foundation of a modern state has been poured, and the framing is up. But the structure being built on top of it requires intensive, careful, sophisticated maintenance. They cannot rely on the momentum of the past 20 years to carry them through the next 20.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this journey.
Sounds good.
The historical records and economic data we've explored today paint an absolute masterpiece of human resilience, ambition, and adaptation. We've tracked Kenya surviving an immense demographic squeeze, managing an economic wagon that was dangerously overloaded with dependents in the 1970s.
We saw them overcome a devastating HIV epidemic that threatened to completely destroy their core workforce.
We watched them aggressively educate millions of citizens through sweeping, bold policy changes. And most remarkably, we saw them use basic mobile technology to completely bypass traditional industrialization, building a modern, dual economy service sector.
And I want to connect this back to you, the listener. When you look at your own smartphone today, or when you use a tap-to-pay app at the grocery store, I want you to realize something profound.
What's that?
The blueprint for the future of digital finance, the operational mechanics of mobile money and decentralized banking, wasn't necessarily drawn up in the glass boardrooms of Silicon Valley or Wall Street.
No, it wasn't.
A massive portion of that future was imagined, built, and perfected right there, in the dust and energy of East Africa, driven by absolute necessity and breathtaking innovation.
We leave you with this final thought to ponder. Kenya leapfrogged the era of copper landline telephones and went straight to ubiquitous mobile networks. They leapfrogged the era of traditional brick-and-mortar retail banking and went straight to digital wallets in the pockets of farmers.
Yeah.
As you look at the map of the developing world today, with billions of people striving for a better standard of living, what other established stages of Western development are they simply going to skip over tomorrow? Will they skip traditional power grids for decentralized solar? Will they skip traditional universities for AI-driven personalized education?
The traditional map of human progress is being rewritten every day.
The roads of progress are clearly not always linear. Sometimes you don't need to pave a road at all if you know how to build a digital bridge over it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.